that started as paintings. These are all people that I know. This is the personality series. And they were chosen by people that had faces that I thought were interesting and had a lot of character. They all have numbers instead of names. So they aren't trying to be a portrait, it is their personalities. And the way that they were painted is underneath, they have a base layer of an acrylic paint that's brightly colored, that I think is a color that reflects some of their personality. Over that, each of these paintings are painted with washcloths. So there's a washcloth of this. This is an arm, and it's a washcloth of that. This, that, and the other thing. That dries. I wipe half of it off. I put another layer on. Just like the layers of your personality are developed over a period of time, yesterday, today, tomorrow, 2 years ago, 20 years ago, all layer on top of each other. Yes, the eyes and some of the detail I did go in with brush, but basically they were all done with washcloths.
Here, I just really like her, and she isn't somebody that I know. And she's just an old lady that I photographed. And so I met her, but I don't. She's not somebody that I have any real great connection to. But the roadmap of her face and how beautiful the lines in her face just tell a whole story of the life that she's led. We all get wrinkles, you all get facial kind of roadmaps depending on your life. And if your life is grouchy and mean, you wind up with a grouchy, mean old face. And her face, she looks like she's 100 years old. But look at, they're smiling eyes, and everything about where every wrinkle is in her face is just saying, I still like you. I am still enamored with looking at the world, and that I'm really excited to see things. So I thought she was just a wonderful face, as well as I just liked the composition as well. But she was also done with the washcloths.
There's something about her face also that has just a familiarity.
Yeah.
It's welcoming.
It's a welcoming face. It's a face that shares love. I just love. And I have loved, as far as that's what it kind of told me, her face. And just like the one downstairs.
Come over here and I'm going to say, so Carol, was this painting done before these two, or is this a transition piece as well?
This is another transition piece in another series. This one's called The Eggs or Boundaries. Has 2 different names. And I think there's 14 of this. I like this size and I like the square. It kind of just keeps things uniform where the work themselves aren't uniform. What was happening with the personalities was, as I was escaping from the canvas, this whole series is about breaking away from, this whole series is about how you have to break away from the boundaries that you've created within yourself. Whether it's, this whole series is about the boundaries that we all live within. No matter how transient they are, that you don't allow yourself to do something, you feel that you have to do something, and they're only as fragile as an egg. And that's what they all are, of people breaking out of eggshells.
Or you tell yourself that you can't possibly do that.
Right, you assume that the boundary is set in stone, and it really is that fragile. And it was painted with the same process as the personality series with the washcloths.
So you use different,
yes.
Just to make it more difficult for yourself?
Or
challenging?
Well, and it wasn't even intentional that I started this whole process of working with washcloths, but I'd be painting with a brush, and it had a very stiff feeling to me to work with brushes, and so it'd be like, okay, that's all right, and then I wouldn't like it, and I just would wash it away. I'd wipe it away. I'd be going, oh, well, if I wipe it away and push it over there, it worked. So it was really just kind of a happy accident that the washcloths became my tool, and the brush. These little things were a brush put in afterwards.
Right.
But the majority of everything was done much more. Has a bigger feel and has a much more of a sculptural feel to work with your whole hand in a washcloth with your finger out of it, as opposed to a tool in between.
Right.
It keeps it on a more sculptural level.
Right. I actually, myself, I use washcloths also.
Oh, do you really?
Not in the way that you do. I probably wash off more than I use it to redirect paint. But it's interesting that you do that.
when you were escaping the canvas
Yep.
and breaking out into less 2D and more
Yep.
3D or a combination thereof,
Yeah.
how did that make you feel?
A lot more comfortable as far as it was starting to get really confining as far as her hair was like this, and it was like, oh, but there's the edge of the canvas. And so I was more worried about creating work that fit within a rectangle or a square. I started working with squares because they actually felt a little bit more circular. But by taking them off, even just with the drawings coming off of the page, I was like, oh, her arm can go up. Her arm can go over here. There can be something falling on the floor. So it brought it out into the audience and let me have you interact with it as opposed to just looking at it.
Did you feel as an artist that gave you more expression to?
For me, it does. It lends me to, it's the way I think, and so it does give me a lot more expression to share with you the ideas that I'm trying to come up with.
Now, would you consider that moving into your conceptual art phase?
Well, we talked about conceptual the other day, and conceptual art is really maybe not the exact description of what I'm doing. Because conceptual art, I can just tell you the whole idea. I really don't have to even make it. I can just tell you what I'm going to do and it's done. So I'm kind of bridging a lot of gaps where it's a sculptural thing, but it's really heavy on the concept. So it's not necessarily a conceptual artist because there is text, there is 3D, there is 2D, so there's many, many components. And the idea, the concept is extremely important, but I haven't taken it to the ultimate that it's just the concept that I could have given you the art project in the car. It just told you what it was, and it need never be done.
Right.
So that's the difference between strictly conceptual art.
Right, and then that leaves it also open to interpretation.
It leaves it open to, and what I'm trying to do is all of my series are about some kind of a thought that I'm having, and I'm sharing you my story, but I also want you to interact with it. So you can interact with them on the canvas, because they're usually fairly highly emotionally charged paintings. But by putting it that you have to walk in and out of them, it changes that now you're part of it. So you become part of, my work is becoming more and more three-dimensional, and video as well.
And that makes it an experience.
Correct, that's maybe a very good word.
It
Yeah.
also leaves it some of it open for a person's own interpretation, what imagery or what feeling does it evoke in them personally.
Well, I think that's kind of what art should do. Too much information loses the viewer and doesn't allow you to become part of it or interact on your own.
Right. And then, so I'm kind of thinking this still all stems back to the Norman Rockwell paintings and how...
I think you're right.
Yeah.
As far as a child, the Saturday Evening Post was always there, and he was phenomenal as far as everybody knows who he is. And they were always there, and there were always little stories of like, ooh, at the dentist. And they were kids, and you related to him. I related to him, and you didn't realize as a young child how talented he was. It was just, that's what you saw. And so I tried to do it, and I'd paint my dolls. And he was very instrumental in work that I did. I grew up in Springfield, Mass. Right after college, I opened the Springfield Art Center. Norman Rockwell is from Western Mass as well. And I was young and had no idea how big of a deal he was, even then. And he was very elderly at that point. So our first opening, our first gallery, don't you know, I called him and invited him.
And did he come?
He answered the phone, and he was really pretty elderly at that time. And he wrote me a big, I wish I had it still, because I don't, but he wrote me a thank you very much for inviting me, but he just wasn't up to it physically. But it was just how accessible he was. He was as easy to get to as his work implied. He was just the guy next door. Like, yeah, okay, I can draw, but I'll come. And he just didn't make it to that thing, but he did write me a personal letter.
Yeah, his art is so realistic. It is, you do look at it and you have a connection to it.
And it's funny that I'm so not realistic, and yet I find him to be one of my strong influencers. And I think it's because of his storytelling.
Yet there's so much emotion in your work,
Right.
that even if it's kind of on the abstract side,
Right.
the viewer, even I personally, for instance, I feel a connection to it.
Right, and so it's not representational what she was doing, but it is the same feeling. Well, I wish, that's very, very presumptuous of me, but it's the feeling that he evoked, and he was able to make you feel his work, and that's what I try and do with mine.
Great.
So some of the ones from the Emotional Energy series, now these were made-up men. So this is just, so they don't have numbers, they have names, because they are made-up people. So he's just a man on a sofa, that's the name of it. And he is just a man on a sofa, and just his posture and everything about him is just, maybe not defeated, but just so human. Just so human. He doesn't look young. He's had a lot. He knows a lot. He's just how he's sitting there. His eyes are not tired, but his eyes are
It's
saying
a little surreal.
a little
And
surreal.
So the technique for this one, you did the layering with the bright acrylic
Right.
colors with the washcloths.
Right.
And then you did the detail in oil.
And the detail I go over. Well, really the whole painting, the undercoat is the acrylic. So that bright blue is acrylic, but all the overcoat, the colors that you're really seeing besides the blue are oil. And they're washcloths. And then I go over it with, the brush to do it. And now this one is a slightly different style, but the same kind of idea. And it started, I dance, I like ballet, and I go to ballet. And they're just called the ballerinas. And if you're in a performance, you're all dressed alike, and you're supposed to look alike. So a lot of people think that's an in-the-mirror picture. And is it? Is it in the mirror? Is she in front? Who's in front of who? Who's behind who? And they really are a different face, but they're very, very similar, just like you should look like in a performance. So anyways, so it's about the movement of how they work together and the circularness of the piece. And the emotionality of like looking out onto your audience as far as the anticipation as well as the nervousness as well as like I've got it and I'm doing it. And she just is beautiful. I mean, I really like Asian things. I have a lot of Asian artifacts. And she's just a beautiful girl. And I used, when I was doing these, I just would wake up with a face in mind, and they would then become a different face as I was making it. But I had an idea of the layout and the angle of how I wanted her to be. And her face just became very gentle, and she's a very, very nice girl. Where the one next to her is just about, people find that very depressing, or some people do, but she's just taking a nap, just like, school kids take naps on their desk. That's
Right.
really all she's doing. And I kind of like that. A lot of people were not all that enamored with it.
I like it because it almost looks a bit somewhat like an abstract piece.
Yeah.
So she becomes mountains in,
Yeah.
in the background.
Yes, it is a little less focused as far as what she actually is. And the last one to talk about in here is this little man was a made-up man, and if you had met my father, you would have sworn it was my dad. And so, as far as how much of my artwork are people I know, or me, it's like, well, they all look like you. They don't, but, as far as people seeing. And that one had no intention of being my father, who lived to be 97, and he didn't have that silly hat, and he'd be very mortified that I would say that. But it really did. You just had those really warm, like, what are you doing? I get it. And I'm still interested eyes. And so it always did look like him to me.
And you have some still lifes here.
Oh.
You don't want to talk about this? Okay. One of the things that I like to say as an artist about my work is that every single piece is a self-portrait.
Yes.
And I think with yours, it really truly is the case.
I think it is more than I realize.
Yeah.
Other people see that completely.
I mean, it might be someone else, but there's so much emotion and energy in there
Yep.
that it gives you a connection.
I think that it's true. One of my favorite ones is this one over in the corner. So I actually did like that series a lot, and that's just called Soulmates. And I think they're two old people, and it's just the intensity of how they're looking at each other. Of they're very abstract people. They're blue, but their faces make sense as far as what they are. And it's just the fact that the intensity of how they're looking at each other, and to have that kind of a relationship with another human being throughout your life, and have to made it to be that old, and have somebody care that much, and still think you're the best thing going in the world. And neither one of them are attractive anymore, but they are to who they're with.
Do you know what it reminded me of? It was kind of almost like primates grooming each other.
You're right. Now that you say that, that actually could vary, especially with the hand. So that particular hand was kind of coming out of that whole. That whole series had started with people with hands, and so the hands were very prominent, and then they became less prominent. This was one where the hands were less prominent and the faces were more.
And then the faces leaned, became the masks.
Correct. So after that whole series, it went to the personalities, to the eggs, and when I left school as in sculpture, I turned it into jewelry. So everything I have done usually is three-dimensional. And when I did those eggs, it was like, oh, I wonder if I could just make some masks and just kind of like something altogether different. And when we start, we should go upstairs to talk about them.
Yeah.
Okay. So it was an entirely different process, and I can even show you how they're built. So I have a wood frame that I built them on, right here, these big frames. So they're chicken wire, there's screening, there's everything under the sun that pop them out and then give them all their shape on top. And those definitely, so this was my frame. They were going to be this big, or some of them are this big, but within this, so now I'd put a nose on it, and the nose would tell me what the eyes would do. The eyes would tell me what the hands would do. So I kept going from one to the other. But that I didn't have in mind what they were going to be until they were being made. And they take quite a while, and they have to dry in between, and there's layering. So this day it looked like one thing, tomorrow it looks like something else. And some of them I stopped in between as far as having different looks, and then they finally hit us.
Two.
Yeah. It was like, it was taking away from that. It was confusing. I don't mind that people, that my figures sometimes are confusing as far as whether they're man or woman. That part's fine. And actually I sometimes go out of my way to have that be the case. But this one went from a man, and really if you look at that face without that lipstick, it's a pretty manly face. But the hands were just, the gnarliness of the hands, and I call it Wednesday afternoon. Most people call that hump day, or it's like, hey, it's only Wednesday, I still have to do all the rest of my week. It's not Friday yet. So it's not like, oh my God, the world is over. It's just like, oh, it's another Wednesday. And it just really shares a lot of emotion to me, and especially seeing the different positions that it has been in. And there's been a few paintings that I have kept visual photographs of the progress of where they've come from and where they've gone. I think it's sort of funny even for myself to look back at them.
Right. Well, that's how I did that.
Yeah.
I think it does still have an androgynous quality
Yeah.
to it.
Well, you're right. I mean, the only thing, I gave her breasts and curly hair, which many men have hair much longer than that, or much bigger than that. But his hands, I put lipstick on her and nail polish, which still doesn't indicate sex, but
Right.
At the same time, it could be either. It's and that's not a bad thing, because I'm not doing pinup work, and pinup, I'm not to say anything good or bad about it, but it is just about the humanness of it. And so a lot are men, and a lot are women, and sometimes men are more fun faces for me, because for me to work with men faces instead of women, women have soft faces in general. Whether you're pretty or not, you usually have fairly soft face.
And it's also covered with a mask that you put on.
And men do the same. Well, men do it differently. They have more the tight jaw, but it's
Right.
still a mask.
Right.
They don't have the
Or they have a beard, or they shave, or they hide behind their sunglasses.
right. And women, have the makeup part, but women's faces, by the nature of just even long before you put makeup on or anything, they're soft and they don't have as much, I can't say character, because a lot of women's faces have a lot of character and a lot, they're almost too beautiful for what I'm trying to do, where I'd rather pull out the character of somebody's face. And men are actually a lot more angular and visually interesting, basically, for me. Not necessarily prettier.
Right. So, so then the hands, your hands are so important, and now you broke away from that, and then
I did.
and you just started to focus on the face,
Right,
and then the face became a mask,
right, exactly.
and so now, can we talk about some of these really great masks that are right here?
So these started just as I was telling you downstairs, and each one of them wound up with a name, and they were, like I was saying, they were being built around those structures, and these teeth. Now they also had many different positions. Like the top two up there that are kind of different and all smushed in.
Mm-hmm.
They were like, okay, I'm sick of doing them exactly like this. What if I just pushed it around and it just stuck eyes on it? And a mouth showed up, and a nose showed up, and so they're a lot more abstract. They're fun. They don't have nearly as much of a concept behind them as they are of just masks that are that we all wear, good or bad. But I was really just making personalities. Again, I was making personalities. Look at this. I mean, what would you if you met that person?
Fun, goofy, yeah.
Who was your orthodontist? Come on, they didn't do the job. They were just fun. They were just fun people. It was making personalities. So they made themselves. And even the three-dimensional ones, because it was like, okay, let's get them off the wall and make them.
How expressive the eyes are.
And I like painting eyes. I just like to paint eyes. I think they're fun to paint. So each one of them kind of took on its own personality. I made the thing and started making it, but at the same time, he was pretty much finished, and I'm going, but he really needs a cigar. I mean, Manny, and that is his name, absolutely, without it, it was like, he forgot his lipstick. So Manny really needed a cigar. And Henry here, I mean, the
Henry.
The comb over,
Yeah, the blowing in the wind comb over is great. Yeah.
I mean, and so, but he's
Look at
got
the
very
eyes.
determined eyes. I'm very self-confident of who I am, and so they're really just they're fun to make.
Did the masks evolve into the 3D?
Yep. And so, and then they just, when I finish a project, it's just like they're just done. And so I made this many, and I could, someone else could maybe make hundreds more. They were kind of done, and if I was to continue making them, they would be forced. Mm-hmm. They would be forced and contrived. And none of these were. It was like, wow, look at that. And they were telling me, oh, well, and like her hair. I mean, it's like, that was an engineering feat. How am I going to get that hair to stand up? I can even show you. Because I think sometimes how things are made are pretty cool.
Right.
And so, how is this going to stand up? So, this whole thing is this wired thing that you can hang it on. And, just this amount of glue, basically. It's not exactly glue, but, adhesive that I've got that her hair will stand up. Otherwise, I would have had to hang her upside down and to have her hair be like that.
Right.
But that it's strong, and they're very light, because there's a lot of styrofoam in here. There's anything that you can carve with is in them. So it was sort of a fun way to. I like the engineering kind of idea behind things, of how you get things to hold together, and like his neck was made. Well, you can't see it. This part of his neck was a swim tube.
Right.
So how am I going to get something light enough to have it be a long neck? So I like the process of putting things together. The engineering part of creating three-dimensional work is very interesting to me. And like the project, the newest project that we haven't talked about that I am working on right now was drawn on a little piece of paper and down to every little nut and bolt and screw many months ago. And so, and filling a prescription for what I did. And now all the images and the personalities are coming out of it, but the actual structure of it was probably 5 nights of deciding how to
Well,
assemble
the
something.
conceptual art was engineered,
Right.
you know, into a piece.
That's exactly a very good way to word that, because that's exactly what it is. And these masks left, well, these people left on to this next series, which is very much a conceptual piece. And this, exactly. So now if I put these on, now we've been talking all this time, and now if we have these on while we're talking,
You can't really tell how we feel.
that's exactly right. So now all the things that we have made connections as far as what I think of you and what you think of me are based on your facial tell of who and what you are. Now I put this on, and now the mask itself is telling you that's who she is. And
She's vain.
And so what this project was there's 21 masks and there's 21 bodies, and they were drawn separately. And to put them together, look at her. It's like, whoa, what do you want?
That's the one that reminds me of that Twilight Zone series episode.
Yeah, you're right, it does.
Before we start talking about this piece, I
Yeah.
wanted to just talk about you as an artist and
Tell me if my hair is
your hair's great. How does it? Oh God, I had the question right here. How does it make you feel when you complete a piece? You have this emotional connection. I know after, like, if I go and I do a show and I'm done,
Yep.
I get what I call show crash, which is I
Yes.
get a little
Right.
down, and then
Yes.
is it something that inspires you, that brings you back up to that, or are you always, your thought process always thinking about the next project?
I think what we were just talking about as far as being so overly productive, and I know exactly what you're talking about. It's like, oh my God, I finished it. Now there's like, what's next? Am I done? And also like, oh, that was it, and hey, that's a nice job. So there is that whole you work forever on a series or a project, or drawn, or clay. It doesn't have to be anything. It could just be like, oh, maybe my shoe could go right there, and that could be her mouth, and she's got her foot in her mouth, and there you go. See, I've already thought of another project.
Right. Yeah. Thank you for being on the show today.
This was really very honored. I'm very honored that you invited me to do this.
Oh, thanks. I'm honored that you let us, and I think your work is amazing, and I really like it because it is completely different than what I'm seeing out there.
Great.
And I hope that our audience appreciates it as
Oh,
well.
that would be nice, and hopefully everybody can come and visit either in New York for the